Part 2, Jeff Nyce reflects upon the first time he saw the memorial for the victims of the Beltway snipers.
So we're walking along, and all of a sudden in the distance I see this very picturesque setting. There's this concrete patio, maybe 50 feet by 50 feet, and on it are these two structures standing maybe 4 feet by 8 feet tall, and 3 or 4 concrete benches. Nice landscape around it and a lake behind it. So I was real curious about what this was. So I go walking over there. I go up to the first structure sitting there, and I look at it. I gotta tell you, I'm stunned. It's the 10 names of the people killed in the D.C. region during October of 2002 by the snipers. And every one of those names had a meaning to me, especially those killed in Montgomery County. James Martin, James Sonny Buchanan, Walker, the cab driver, Lori Ann Lewis Rivera, whose 2-year-old daughter was in the van at the time, Conrad Johnson, the bus driver that was killed at the time. And it just struck me.
Welcome to Game of Crimes. I'm sorry. Here's a guy, highly trained SWAT operator. All I can think of you is in one of them frickin' hospital gowns with your ass hanging out. You're wheeling everything into your bathroom to get to your secret stash of weights. What have we sunk to?
Oh, and it's super lightweight. So I exercise again, and of course my heart rate goes up. I didn't think about it, and they come rushing in, and I get caught.
Did they take your weights away from you?
They were so cool about it. They said, "Look, we don't get you, but you can work out. Just tell us when you're going to." So they're really good about it.
Oh God, crazy shit, man. I thought you did some other crazy shit. This is crazier than taking down the snipers almost. It's like, okay, I've technically I was dead for a couple minutes, but I'm alive now, so let's go hit the treadmill and get some weights.
And you're about to impose a heart attack on these nurses because you're thinking, oh hell, he's coding again.
Hey, can I share with you my Air Cat hat?
You're what?
Oh, yeah. No, I want to hear that story because I know exactly the scene you're talking about from Apocalypse Now. By the way, Robert Duvall lives here in Loudoun County, and I've run into him a couple times over at the place called Fireworks Pizza. He's a little older now. Oh, and by the way, before you tell that story, here's my one connection. My grandfather... my grandparents grew up in Colorado, and there's this place called Ouray, Colorado, which is where they filmed the original True Grit. And so John Wayne and Robert Duvall were in the original True Grit, and Robert Duvall was Ned Pepper. You only see him for about 10 seconds, but my grandfather is one of the old timers rocking back and forth on the porch in Ouray, Colorado, when Ned Pepper comes riding into town, Robert Duvall. And so when I ran into Robert Duvall over there, I said, "Hey, you've actually worked with my grandfather before on the film." And he was only there for 10 seconds. He had no idea it was, but that's my claim to fame. I can say, hey, I've got people who ran a film with Robert Duvall. But let's hear your story's better. Tell us about the Aircav hat, because that goes back to Robert Duvall in Apocalypse Now.
And what happened was, months before I ended up going to the stem cell transplant, my team had given me an Aircav hat, like the one worn by Robert Duvall in the movie Apocalypse Now. We replaced Air Cav Colonel. I'm trying to remember his name that he plays. I can't recall, but the point is, in the movie Apocalypse Now, Duvall plays this Air Cav Colonel, and they attack this Viet Cong village in the Vietnam War. And the battle is ended when a napalm strike finishes it. And one of the famous scenes that Duvall was in, he's on the beach. He picks up his sand, he's on one knee, and his buddies are gathered around. And he talks about, in a nutshell, he goes, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It smells like victory." So I had brought some special attire. I wanted to see something out to my team next day to let them know I appreciate the hat that they gave me. So my wife's there, she's got the camera. So I put on my Air Cav hat that they had given me. And I get down on my knee and dressed up like Robert Duvall. And I say, "I love the smell of stem cells in the morning. It smells like victory."
But you have to play it, though, with what he did on the speakers, too. He was playing the Ride of the Valkyrie, so Wagner.
Oh, yeah, my gosh, it's such a great song.
Yeah. Oh, yes, yeah. Wagner. Hey,
yes,
but before we transition off of this, though, very poignant moment for you, though, because when you were diagnosed, you didn't tell anybody only the medical staff knew, and your wife knew Jane. But there was a reason why you didn't tell anybody. Tell us why.
Well, at that time, my mom was in her final days of cancer, and she was dying. And my son was 10 years old, and he was concerned about his grandmother. And I did not want him to know about me, given all that was taking place. I thought the focus needed to be on my mom's last days. And ironically, the month that I was diagnosed, early August, is the month my mom died, later that August.
Man, you look, but just the fact that we've all had parents pass away. Both my mom and dad have passed away, and for you not to share that information, and because it was more important to you that the focus be on your mom, I mean, just says things about your character, man.
Absolutely. And looking out for your son.
Yeah. How old's your son now?
He's 18, and a driving force for me to survive was my son. I want to see him do his early things in life. Get his first job, get his driver's license, graduate from high school. And fortunately, I've seen all these things happen. And it's just my desire. I told my doctors on day one I would be the first to survive this. And I kind of use, if I could share with you, the mindset from my book to survive, because it actually has 2 applications, the name of that book.
Yeah.
Please do.
Okay, the name of the book, Failure is Not an Option. The first is as applies to SWAT. As I told you earlier, I was an operator, team leader, and commander, and I was a longest-serving guy with 30 years. But as a commander, there's 3 things I always asked the men, and they delivered every time. You never complain, you never quit, and failure is not an option as it relates to the mission. So they delivered every time. So when I got ill, I took this same words and I applied them on the medical end. I said to myself, never complain, never quit, and failure is not an option as it relates to the mission. My mission was to survive. So I've kind of used that as my mindset to kind of push forward in the other half of my life, if you will.
Yeah, that positive mindset, it's not a joke. It's if you can beat that mental part, it in your case especially, it's been instrumental in helping you survive and to beat this, right?
Oh, without question.
Yeah. Hey, but the other thing, too, that was interesting, because I just want to correct, it was actually April 15th with the Boston bombing. That's when you had your transplant. But 5 days before that, April 10th, you got suckered into showing up for something. They told you, hey, we need you to report, Officer Jeff Nyce and Sweet. And Jeff Splenda. So what did they pull on you 5 days before you go in for this stem cell transplant, which you coded and you just simply glossed over, and we had to bring you back twice to get you to tell us the story. So tell us about April 10th. How did they surprise you?
What happened was I was told to report to the police headquarters for a discussion on active shooter protocols. So I show up and I walk into this room. The entire central SWAT team is there, our D-SWAT team, some executive officers, and my son was there, and I was so glad he was there. And what I didn't realize is they were going to present me with an award, the Living Legend Award. So Assistant Chiefs Daryl McSwain and Luther Reynolds called me forward. I was presented with this award called the Living Legend Award, and it was an award for my time in SWAT and SOD. And I have to tell you, I cannot tell you how much that meant to me on 2 fronts. Number one, 5 days prior going into the unknown for your stem cell transplant, these guys reaffirmed to me, hey, we're with you. And then 2, to bring my son and let him see that. So for me, this is a very special time and moment. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, the reason I bring that up is that eventually all good things come to an end. Eventually, you have to retire. And I tell you, Montgomery County, and we both know Mitch Cunningham, a buddy of mine, went on to Wilmington to become a deputy chief. He's the one that put us in touch with you. So, Mitch, this is your shout out. But you were able, Montgomery County took care of you. You were able to stay on SWAT in an administrative position, for a couple of years to get to your retirement. But tell us about, there's 2 things I want to cover. One is the last raid that you did that your son got to go on with you. Tell us about that.
Well, I was given my diagnosis. I knew that my time in SWAT was over. And I believe it was, if I recall correctly, October of 2012. And I didn't know if I was going to make it the duration. So I wanted my son to at least come on the last raid. So he stayed back with the tactical medics in a safe position. He saw what took place. And I was very thankful that he could do that. And kind of playing off what you just said, Daryl McSwain, the Special Director of Special Operations Division, he allowed me to stay in SWAT for the duration. I said, can I stay in an administrative position? I said, I said, I'm not sure. They knew I was question was whether I would make it until retirement. And McSwain made the point saying, Jeff, as long as I'm in SOD, you will be here. And that was huge because if I died, I wanted my last memory of my son to be that of a SWAT commander. And they allowed me to do that. And what was amazing is my counterpart, the other sergeant in SWAT, Brian Dillman, he had to do double duties for 2 years basically, because you should have two SWAT sergeants. I was simply doing whatever administrative tasks I could do. I'm very poor at administrative tasks, so I wasn't much of a help to him. But the point is, I was a mere puppet figure the last 2 years, and Brian Dillman was a true SWAT commander. Yet they let me hold that position in the event things went south. So I was very grateful to McSwain and Dillman for doing those things for me.
Yeah, but you got to talk about the raid, though, because you got to flashbang a couple pit bulls.
Yeah. So you make a great point there. So we had hit this place before, and common practice, we were just hitting them for guns and drugs. Common practice with drug dealers is to use pit bulls to slow our entry so they can get to their guns and drugs. On a previous occasion, we had a officer who was bitten scrotum. Oh, yeah, by a pit bull. So an effective solution against the dogs is pulling in a flashbang diversion device. It's basically a hand grenade with a no fragmentation. Term is flash and bang, hence the term flashbang. It sends any dog running. We hit this place on a previous occasion, and my assignment was the kitchen. And on that occasion, I found a pit bull in the sink, shivering with his hands over his paws over his eyes. So on this one, we deploy the flashbang again. And once again, same effect on the pit bulls. So I asked my son years later, my gosh, what do you remember most about that raid? He says, Dad, the pit bull that pooped at the front door. He said the team put like a carpet over it to cover it so they wouldn't step on it. I said, of course you remember that, But the highlight is, the reality is, the pit bulls don't get shot because they're not attacking police, and we turn the pit bull over to animal control. So they get a much better future thereafter.
Right.
But just have a pit bull crap its pants right there on the door, lads, as you're coming through. Oh, now, quick story before we ask you the lesson. That reminds me of a guy that was one of our SWAT teams when I was a detective. They didn't quite figure that out, that you could throw a flashbang in and distract the dog. The dog comes at him. He shoots the dog, or misses the dog, shoots the speaker instead. So
Oops. And you know what? It's still the same amount of paperwork, isn't it?
Say it's God, if you're going to do it, though, yeah. But anyway, so they were getting attacked by the dog. Fortunately, he only shot the speaker, was my understanding. But hey,
let me, if you don't mind, let me just touch on your positive mindset, because I think it's really important here to your success and your survival. You had a choice to make after you talked to Drew Tracy, right? He gave you some great advice. And so you had a choice. What was that choice? What was the two choices?
You have a choice. Either wait to die or choose to live. And I chose to live. And I developed a very specific plan on survival, on how I would do that. And preparation is the key to anything success. So I had a plan for that. And one thing I would share with you is that I had many lessons learned. So I have 7 specific lessons in terms of how to survive life-threatening diseases or a poor diagnosis in terms of things to do that I've taken away from this.
And did your faith play any part in this?
Absolutely. Amongst those 7 things I talked about, the greatest is belief in a higher power. I believe that, I'm not a particularly religious person. I rarely go to church, but I've always believed in the Lord Jesus Christ. And I believe I'm here because of some efforts I have made, but also because of his divine intervention.
I agree 100% with you, brother. And just glad to have you here. Holy cow. This is unbelievable.
You keep talking about your 7 rules. Let's go through them.
And thank you for sharing this, because the reason I would like to share this is I hope that it'll help people who have life-threatening diseases or family members and help them improve their quality of life. The first is obvious, the best of medical professionals. I was very fortunate to have my oncologist, John Walmark, one of the best in the world, Badgers, who performed my stem cell transplant, awesome, and from NIH, he's a captain when I met him, but he's now the Assistant Surgeon General of the United States, and Upper Rear Admiral Richard Childs. Those 2 guys are phenomenal. Now, You can have the best medical professionals, but it means nothing unless I do my part, patient responsibility. I have to make my effort the best I can so that what they do works. Number 3, and this was a big one to me. Early on, about 6 weeks into my treatment with heavy chemo, you get what's called chemo fog. It's recognized by the American Cancer Society, and you're in this fog, and you're kind of out of sorts. So I got up one day, and I saw that my room was complete disarray. My bed was not made, clothes were all over the place. So what I did is, this back in 2012, I made my bed, and thereafter I picked up my room. And what I found by doing that task was a very positive thing. It led to many more positive tasks over the course of the day. Now, what's interesting is I learned that in 2014, a Navy SEAL, Admiral McCraven,
Gave the commencement speech at the University of Texas.
yes, and what he talked about was making your bed and how it lead to many positive tasks thereafter.
Yep.
And, I learned that the hard way in 2012. I imagine he'd been doing his whole life. And I got to tell you, the man was spot on. He was amazing. So I start every day by making my bed, positive note, sense of order. Then the 4th thing that's important to me, now, as you know, I'm into exercise. So what I found is that if I could exercise at any level for 30 minutes to help me, the reason I say this is because every day when I woke up, I was nauseous, had a headache, was in this fog. If I could exercise at any level for 30 minutes, even walk at an incredibly slow pace, what happened is the nauseous feeling would go away, the headache would go away, I would somewhat come out of this fog. I've often speculated and wondered if it was because of endorphins that are released during exercise that bring you happiness or peace of mind. So I start every day by making my bed and exercising. Number 5, and this is an important one, nutrition. Now, I'm not going to get all the specific details, but there are a lot of things you can do in terms of nutrition that will help you with cancer and your choices. There are some poor choices you make as well, but what I'll simply say on a nutshell is that sometimes you can't receive your chemo treatment because your labs are out of sorts. So what I did is I researched and found things to nutritionally keep my labs back on the level so I could get the chemo. Because what I saw with my mom when she died, there were gaps in treatment. And when there were gaps in treatment, her health declined. So I decided I would not have a gap in treatment. Platelets, for example, can be an issue when you're taking all this chemo. They get real low. I learned that omega-3s can help platelets. I had salmon for 2 weeks straight for dinner. They went back to the norm. I learned that other things, alkaline phosphate, AST and ALT, all related to liver function. My liver function was out of norm. Water and lemon juice, 2 weeks later, back in the norm. Kidney function can be an issue. Big hydration, berries, particularly strawberries, raspberries, things of that nature, got them back in the norm. But my point is, there are a lot of things in the nutrition end you can do to help yourself. We all suffer from inflammation as we get older, as I'm sure we all know. Inflammation was turmeric, it's a spice, mixed with black pepper, because that helps the absorption. And also scallions, onions, all are very good at reducing inflammation, which is important when you have cancer. So these are some of the aspects related to nutrition. That was number 5, is that correct? Correct. 6, this is so important, the support of family and friends. And I say that because my first chemo treatment that I went for, I walked in the doctor's office. I walked in, 30 people were there. My entire central SWAT team, members of the DSWAT team, some executive officers, and my wife. And they only allowed back then 4 people back in the treatment area. So my wife came back and 3 others. And when I came out 1 hour later, everybody was still there.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and that told me that these people are my brothers for life. And I cannot tell you the measure of support and the strength it gives you at that moment in time. And my counterpart, Brian Dillon, the other SWAT sergeant, what he did was, every time I had treatment, 2 or 3 SWAT officers were there. They'd come back with me for the duration of the treatment. And I cannot tell you what that means, that you're trying to get through each day. It's a struggle. It was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and so what that does is that promotes in your mind that you don't want to let your partners down, do you?
Absolutely, because they do anything for me and I do anything for them. Those guys are awesome. And of course, the last one, the most important one of them all. Faith in, for me, a higher power. For me, it was the Lord Jesus Christ. And I believe these 6 things that I've worked on and the divine intervention is why I'm still here today.
God bless you, brother. We're with you. We're not there with you physically, but we're with you.
Thank you.
Murphy would like to talk to you about his hemorrhoids and inflammation. So maybe you guys can go offline and talk about what you can do to help him with the inflamed stuff there.
And I've taken it to a personal level and given it a name. It's called Morgan.
Just when you thought you're done with it, it pops back up and rears its ugly head. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you had an A game, Murph. Apparently not today.
No, I'm with you. I'm ahead of you, as a matter of fact, just like usual, but that's another story.
Yeah. Well, hey, but Jeff, let's kind of bring this to a close. There's two things left. One is September 30th, 2014. Let's talk about your last day.
Okay, last day of the department.
Yep.
Wow. The last day I drive my SWAT vehicle to the Special Operations Division, and my counterpart, Brian Dillman, is going to be a ride back in his vehicle. So I have my last words with the guys in SWAT. They're all awesome. And as I get into his vehicle for him to drive me back, he's brought my son. So my son's in the car. And as I look out, all of a sudden I see all these motorcycle cops, probably 30 of them lined up on their motorcycles. It's pretty amazing to me. What happens is I get this escort back to my house. And instead of going directly to my house, they go by police headquarters. And as I go by police headquarters, that's kind of overwhelming. Out front, there are people out there saluting and stuff like that. It's kind of a crazy moment. And then I'm following only two motor officers at this point. The rest of them had veered off. So I'm following two motor officers, and we kind of meander back to my house, and we make a turn back to come down where my house is at. As we turn that road, all the other motor officers are lined up with their motorcycles on both sides, at attention, saluting. And in the front there are armored personnel carrier and the SWAT team.
Oh, jeez.
Tell me about it.
Jeez.
So I gotta tell you, it was a pretty overwhelming moment as I looked at it. And fortunately, the one thing great that Brian Dillman has always done is he brought my son along to witness all these events. I mean, it was very important to me.
What a tremendous amount of respect by your colleagues. I can't think of anything they could have done any better to recognize you for your sacrifices, your dedication. The citizens of Montgomery County and the National Capital Region lost a true asset when you were no longer on the job. That doesn't mean we've lost you, but that is just, you know what, brings tears to my eyes, and I wasn't even there.
Well, I appreciate your words. The only thing I will say that you're only as good as the people that you hang out with. And these guys are freaking incredible,
Oh, geez, and I'm hanging out with Morgan? Oh, my gosh. I got to revisit this.
Things have elevated for you, Murph. You never knew you were going to be able to achieve and perform at this level. Speaking of that, Jeff, but last thing, because again, it's like you weren't done. There was just another challenge for you. 3 months after you retire, you got a stroke.
That's correct.
Okay, you going to leave me hanging, or are we going to talk about this?
Yes. What happened was I got in early morning hours and went to go to the bathroom. Next thing I knew, I found myself on the floor. And I tried to get up, and the whole left side of my body, I just couldn't get up. So I called out to my wife, and she came in, and she immediately noticed that the whole left side of my face was drooped and suspected that I had a stroke. So I was transported to the hospital, and they confirmed that. And what happened was, once again, going back to just incredible things the guys would do, I am now retired. So I'm transported to Suburban Hospital. Well, across the street from where Suburban Hospital is, Panera, and very often after the raid, the guys would go there and have a breakfast. Well, Jane calls the guys, and they all came and showed up.
Yep.
It was absolutely amazing. I could barely talk. My whole face was drooped. This, that, and everything that goes with it. But you have no idea what it meant to have the whole guys come in there. When you're grasping for your strength, they give it to you.
Yeah, when you're hurting, they're there.
Well, there's a story about Panera I want you to talk about, though. We're going to close off with this because it's the only practical joke you were ever able to. You're too easy. You give it up. I mean, it's like, remind me not to rob a bank with you because you'll dime me out in a second. Yeah, I got it. But you were able to do one practical joke because of the mask, because of your treatments, and it involved Panera.
That's correct. A guy named Jordan Young had given me a ride to see Dr. Badros. And at that time, my brother was coming to town a couple of days later. And my brother, to honor me, had shaved his head. And I told him I hadn't lost any hair, and sorry if I'm not shaving my head for you.
So your brother didn't check with you before he shaved his hair?
And we both laughed. So anyway, I told Jordan, hey, look, I said, as you mentioned, I've never been able to pull off a joke on these guys. My brother completely opposite of me. I'm completely serious. He's completely comical. This is right down his normal, what he does. I said, tell the team that when you picked me up, I had lost all my hair. He says, okay. And I said, if you see me come in or anybody, don't say a word. He goes, all right, I'm with you. So what happens is my brother comes in town, and they go to Panera for breakfast like they always do. And they were always inviting me, no matter what. So I tell my brother, look, what I want you to do is you're going to dress exactly the same as I do. He and I are about the same height and build, so he dresses the same way I do. And because I just had my stem cell treatment, I had to wear a mask which covered half my face. And I said, I want you to go in here with your shaved head and act like, it's me. And what Jordan had told the team is, hey, when I took Jeff to the hospital, he lost all his hair. So we pull in, my brother and I, and he's dressed exactly as I am. And I see all our unmarked SWAT vehicles out there, so I know the guys are inside. I said, they sit in the back. So Todd comes walking in, and some of the guys go, he's dressed exactly as I would be, in the jeans and this shirt that has a SWAT emblem on and so forth. And the guys go, hey, Sarge. And one of our guys, awesome guy, Kendrick, sees him, advises him to sit across from him. So he sits down with Kendrick, and Kendrick asks him a question. And Todd knew all my idiosyncrasies. He goes, roger that. And then somebody else asks him something, and he goes, yippee-ki-yay. So then this guy, Steve Brown, goes, hey, Sarge, can I get you a cup of coffee? And my brother was pushing with me. He said, I knew he was pushing. He goes, yeah, can I get a sesame bagel too? And Steve Brown goes, sure. So Steve Brown gets him this coffee and bagel. So now they're in there carrying on. And then after about 5 minutes, I come walking in. I said, hey, guys, I see you met my brother. And it was dead silence. You could have heard a pin drop for like about 10 seconds. And then Steve Brown goes, you bastard, I bought you a cup of coffee and a bagel.
Well, you know what I'm more unimpressed with is the fact is that they'd worked with you for how many years, and your brother pulled it off. He sat down there and he pulled it off.
And two of the guys that always look after my welfare, Brian Dillman and Spiro Takis, they said they were getting ready to call an ambulance. Apparently my brother had played the role so well, they thought he was so sick he needed to go to the hospital immediately. They said, it's a good thing you came in when you did. We were about to get ambulance and transfer him to the hospital.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And it's funny because my brother said later, he goes, I'm glad these guys had a sense of humor, or I knew I'd been in trouble. So we all kind of laughed, but it was comical.
Yeah, and did your buddy ask for the money back for the bagel and the coffee?
Nope. Todd still owes him that money.
That seems to be a recurring theme here, Murph. We got several people who either owed 6 packs of beer or,
Oh, everybody owes somebody something.
Yeah, Zach and Kevin and stuff, they're still owed some beers. Yeah, we're going to have to take care of that. So, hey, well, Jeff, let's end on a high note with that, too, because I got to tell you, having lived in this area, and you know about the stories, but you never get to know what really happened. And to talk with somebody who was there, who had eyes on, that was part of taking this down, and what you guys had to go through for those days, protecting everybody else and doing the stuff. Again, you folks can't see me. This is me saluting you, saying thank you for everything you did. It's been an awesome podcast, Murph. I mean, it's like we were talking about this when we were doing the pre-call. I could see your veins. You were getting amped up. You were walking around. You were like, it's almost like thought you were there. We're getting ready to breach the vehicle.
Yeah, you know what? And I know that the good Lord put me in the position I was supposed to be in law enforcement. 38-year career. Never missed. I loved 38 years of what I did, but you pick the right career afterwards. When I talk to guys like you, Jeff, and I still get fired up. I mean, yeah, we were doing one yesterday, and my legs start shaking, and I know when that leg starts shaking, I'm probably going to be up out of my chair here in a minute. But if I happen to be in Florida right now, if I do that, I'm going to knock the table over. The camera's going to go flying. The headphones are going to peel off. You'll see me sitting in my underwear, and Morgan's excited when I see that.
Are you in your underwear right now? Don't stand up. Don't stand up. I don't want to know.
Hey, but there is one thing I want to mention too before we sign out of here, and that is Jeff's book, "Failure's Not an Option." I got my copy on Amazon in the Kindle version. We highly recommend this. I mean, you talk about it, just like we mentioned a minute ago, the positive mindset. This is a motivational book. No matter what you're going through in life, there's something in there for you. And you think this DC sniper, that's the most exciting thing he ever did? He's got just story after story after story of SWAT operations that took place up in there. Some we may bring you back on the show, Jeff, to talk about
we'll talk
the
about
bank
discovery,
robbers.
the IAD, and some other stuff. But like I say, great stuff. What a career. Hey, final thing, you did the book. What's next for you? What are you doing now?
I'm just kind of taking it as it comes. Kind of riding this book. I've had some opportunities that may lead into a documentary on the book. We'll see. I don't want to be premature, but I'm hopeful of that. We'll see how things play out.
Yeah, well, and we talked about that too. And again, so we hooked. Hopefully, we can get you hooked up with our agents. When the time comes. And but that the story deserves to be told, and that's why I said we wanted to keep it. We didn't want to go off on the direction of Malvo and Muhammad. This is your story, Jeff, and it's an awesome story. And man, we are proud to have you on the podcast.
Absolutely, and you know what, Jeff, you're even in retirement, you're still doing the right thing. You're still trying to help your fellow man. And I like this thing that I've kind of coined because I'm not that smart, but just because we retire does not mean that our oaths expire, right?
Not at all. You're always a cop. You're always law enforcement. You're always whatever agency you work for, without question.
The great thing about technology and the show is we can kind of do whatever the hell we want. And after we got done with this episode with Jeff, he got to thinking about stuff, and he said, hey, look, there's some stuff I wish I would have covered. There's some additional material I'd like to give. And rather than us trying to figure out a fancy way to insert this back in there, we said, hey, look, just come back on. Let's take the time. Let's talk about it. And of course, we had to do it at a time where Murph was up because anything past 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he's usually got his fourth nap of the day.
Yeah,
so
you're pushing
Steve,
it right now. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
you're pushing it.
So, hey, Jeff, so let's do that. Let's dive back in because I know you sent us a really good email. And of course, being a SWAT team leader, you've got your ops plan, you've got everything detailed out. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what you wanted to get into, because what you wanted to do was talk about, and really let's dive into the observation of the vehicle in the shooting port, because this was the reason people kept looking for a panel van and other stuff, and nobody thought to look that snipers were hiding in the trunk of a Chevy Caprice, right? So why don't you dive in and take it from there, Jeff?
And I appreciate the opportunity for round two. Some things I think that should have been mentioned is that sniper hide in port was also something that's utilized by the IRA with some success in Northern Ireland. And reference the Bushmaster rifle that was recovered, bungee in place behind the back seat. It was a Bushmaster .223 caliber rifle, and it had a fully loaded mag, one magazine, and an EOTech sight. An EOTech sight is a red dot system used to acquire the target. It also had a bipod that was folded underneath.
Hey, Jeff, you were also saying that the HRT leader, his name was Pierce.
That's correct.
He saw something unusual about the back seat, which kind of led you to them looking into that area, right? What was that was unusual?
I don't recall, but for something just seemed unusual to him. And what was rather ironic is that the rifle had not been recovered at that point. So then we got back to the academy that morning. At that point, we found out that evidence technicians found the Bushmaster behind that back seat. Good observation on his part.
So what you're saying is at the time of the assault on the vehicle, and you extract Malvo and Muhammad out of there, now they're in cuffs, and obviously the first thing they're doing is searching for the rifle. There's no rifle, at least initially, that anybody sees, right?
That's correct. The only thing we found was a .223 caliber round in the parking lot itself. But again, the rifle itself had not been recovered. But it seemed very apparent to one of the HRT operators, John Landman, that the trunk was being used as a sniper hide, because he came to the conclusion based on that port that was cut out above the license plate, the small hole. And he also noted there was a sock in there to camouflage its appearance of the port. And he was smart enough to recognize that whole set for what it was, even though the rifle was not recovered. I was not.
Now, did he recognize that out at the rest stop on the interstate before the vehicle was towed out of there?
Yes, he did, because he's the one who made the comment that there's a sock in that small hole to cover its appearance, which led me to believe that he recognized this as being used as a sniper hide, even though the weapon had not been recovered. Good observation on his part. Another good observation by the team leader, Pierce, that the back seat was something out of sequence there.
That had to create a little bit of a pucker factor, not having, you've got the hide, you've got the sniper vehicle, you got the two snipers, but you don't have that weapon, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, do we have the right people?
When we got back to Cadbury, I was so relieved to hear that they had recovered that Bushmaster 223 caliber rifle, again budging place behind the backseat cushion.
Something else I wanted to focus in on real quick too is, I did this analysis, and actually I'd kind of talked about this before about looking at the 9/11 hijackers and how much contact they had with law enforcement, and then we looked at the sniper case. They were contacted, at least their vehicle was, 13 times during that, I believe, 33 days.
Wow.
This goes to show you, because their tag was run through the National Crime Information Center, for the folks who aren't law enforcement. That's the central place to where if you have anything that's stolen or wanted, or it's a central repository. So if you're stopped by a trooper on the side of the road or stopped by a city officer or somebody and they check your plates, it goes through this computer. And so the reason I say that, this is how effective what they did is because 13 times that plate was checked by an officer. Now, we don't know if it was the front plate or the back plate, but if it was from behind, you're thinking, how good was this? Because the officer running the plate, that port is right there. They don't even know that hide is there. This is why it was so tough to find this vehicle, because that hide, that sock covering it up, made it look like maybe just another, it was a piece of crap car to begin with, right?
And you make a great point, because when I saw it, the car had this overall damaged appearance, and I thought maybe somebody had tried to break in the trunk previously, and I'm standing only 3 or 4 feet away from it, whereas the officer coming up, he'd have to be right at the trunk to see it.
Wow. So, as they say, soldier, carry on. What's next after this? So you're back. You've got tell us a little bit more about this EOTech. Was it based on the size of the sniper, the hide? The sniper hole. They actually had enough room, right, to look through the sight and acquire the targets?
That's correct. It's a red dot system that lines up on your target, and effective way of hitting your target, unfortunately.
Well, that's going to take a fairly large hole, right? How many inches tall and wide would you guesstimate it is?
Again, I'm just trying to recall. I'd say it's probably maybe 2 to 3 inches high and maybe a couple inches wide. Now, whether a portion of that trunk was actually raised to some degree, I don't know. But again, clearly that's what they're using, obviously in a covert manner.
Wow. So they probably couldn't extend the bipod down on the rifle in that small
Not outside
space.
Certainly not outside the trunk of the vehicle.
Well, so again, to your point, Steve, too, is that you after you assault this vehicle, you look in there and the one thing you're looking for is where's the weapon. You're going, do we have the right guys?
Oh, that's an oh shit moment, let me tell you.
You made a great point, because we were doing so many ops. We always live by the saying, never rest on your achievements. You only because your next operation. So for the next 12 years, it's just operation after operation. I never really reflected on that event. And it's rather ironic, because about 3 or 4 years ago, my wife and I went to a place called Brookside Gardens in Wheaton Regional Park in Montgomery County, Maryland. It's a garden-type setting with nice landscape and lakes behind it. It's kind of a nice place to go on a warm summer day. So we're walking along, and all of a sudden in the distance, I see this very picturesque setting. There's this concrete patio, maybe 50 feet by 50 feet, and on it are these two structures standing maybe 4 feet by 8 feet tall, and 3 or 4 concrete benches. Nice landscape around it and a lake behind it. So I was real curious about what this was. So I go walking over there. I go up to the first structure sitting there, and I look at it. I got to tell you, I'm stunned. It's the 10 names of the people killed in the D.C. region during October of 2002 by the snipers. And every one of those names had a meaning to me, especially those killed in Montgomery County. James Martin, James Sonny Buchanan, Walker, the cab driver, Lori Ann Lewis Rivera, whose 2-year-old daughter was in the van at the time, Conrad Johnson, the bus driver that was killed at the time, and it just struck me. And then the names of those that were killed in Virginia: Dean Harold Myers, Kenneth Bridges, FBI analyst Linda Franklin, and then poor 72-year-old Pascal Charlet walking down the street in D.C., shot and killed 100 yards inside the line from Montgomery County. It's the first time I ever really started to think about this event and reflected on it because we were so busy during SWAT. And it really kind of hit me hard in terms of thinking back for a moment in time. Two people that really wondered about how they were doing today was first the 2-year-old daughter that was in that van where mom was killed. I mean, at what point in her life did she understand the tragic circumstances that her mom was killed under? And then poor Iran Brown, 13 years old, shot in the back. And the quick actions of his life, or of his aunt Tanya Brown, saved his life. How are they doing today? I'm very curious. I hope, given these terrible traumas that they experienced, that everybody's doing well.
So when you're reflecting on this, Jeff, what was the thing that probably impacted you most? Was it about the loss of life? Was it about the impact to these kids? Or, the other thing I wanted to ask you about too is how did this affect you? Because a lot of times in military and law enforcement, a lot of people deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. You see lots of stuff over and over again. How did this affect you coming out of this? How did you reflect back on that about how it affected you?
Well, it's funny that you asked because I walked over then after about 10 minutes to the other statue there, and this kind of a narrative of the timeline of the events that unfolded in the D.C. region back in October of 2002. And for the first time ever, I started to really think how many lives were affected by this, because I think the snipers were tied to 23 or 26 shooters across the country ultimately. How many thousands of people, whether it be family, friends, or people that were on scene and saw the shooting, that were affected forever thereafter? So for me, being SWAT and just kind of, operation after operation, you kind of get to, for lack of a better way to say it, immune to what you see and what takes place. But having been out of law enforcement, for years thereafter now and retired, first time I actually kind of reflected on things. It just kind of struck me in terms of the magnitude of what these two. Can I share something with you about good women?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, Jeff.
My wife, Jane, retires this Friday after 39 years of service with Montgomery County Police, longest serving female in the history of the department.
Wow.
Yay. Hey, we got to, hey.
To her. Yes, ma'am.
Congratulations for that.
And
the question is, how does she put up with you?
She has a lot of tolerance, obviously. I'm a very stubborn person. She recognizes that.
It's the same way Trish and Connie put up with us.
Yeah, worst thing in the world is for Steve to retire. What are you doing home all the time? Go somewhere.
Don't you have somewhere to go?
Yeah. Hey, but Jeff, dive into that a little bit. I mean, you compartmentalized during this time, right? I mean, what got to you the most while this operation was going on, to where you kind of said, "Hey, I can't let myself go there. I've got to stay focused on this." Was there one particular incident that almost made you cross over and start letting the emotions affect you, as opposed to staying, operationally focused?
Relative to the snipers themselves?
Yeah, I mean, and what some of the calls you went on.
Yeah, I mean, I think without question, just the volume of calls I had run beforehand. At that point, I'd done 2,000 raids, barricades, over my career. And like Steve had said, I saw an incident where a suspect in an armed robbery, who was the father, shot and killed his 2 kids. I think one was like 18 months and one was like 3 years old, and then turned the gun on himself. And again, for all of us in law enforcement, we see these type of things. Anyone who's done this career for any length of time, you'll see stuff like that. But again, you have to kind of put that aside and move forward.
I kind of let you go on before we actually gave some explanation, because a lot of people will hear you talk and then they'll hear kind of a pause. And it's almost like you're labored for breathing. And then we talked about what was affecting you. So why don't you give us an update as well on your health? Again, just kind of recap what it is you had, and let's talk about how you're feeling today.
Can do. In 2012, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma cancer and also a cardiac amyloidosis. The amyloidosis is worse than the cancer itself, because what happens with that is protein deposits go into my heart, and it makes the walls of my heart very thick, and on occasion difficult to breathe and even have some conversations. So in this podcast, you might notice at times I'm a little out of sync as it comes to speaking and so forth with my breath. Also, in order to stay alive, I'm basically on chemo almost every day of my life, 2 weeks on, 1 week off, and that's how I function. But given the fact that I was given less than 2 years to live back in 2012, I've kind of defied the odds, and I'm not complaining at all. It's just kind of a new norm, in order, if you will, to kind of stay in the game. I've kind of learned what I need to do on the medical side and other aspects to kind of stay in the game and so forth.
You know, and people might be thinking with that much chemo, you might lose your hair. But, dude, you're competing with me for having terrific hair. How do you keep your hair?
Well, I'm fortunate in that I had a stem cell transplant back in 2013 that I coded during and so forth. And there, prior to stem cells transplant, I had a different kind of chemo that I had. So at that point, at some point, most of my hair had fallen out and became very thin. But the chemo I'm on now apparently does not affect my hair. So I'm fortunate that I'm able to retain it and so forth.
Well, and
Murph's jealous. Murph's jealous.
Morgan, who told you had good-looking hair? Did Trish tell you that? She's lying to you.
Hey, as many news appearances as I've done, I've graduated from the cable school of hair. So, look, I mean, I'm like, I got it going on. I got to go get a haircut today. You folks can't see this on video, but yeah, it's been a while. I got to go get the golden locks trimmed, the gray locks.
You don't look a day over 91.
Yeah. You know, my grandma, she had a trick. She said, look, at some point, women lie about their age, and they shouldn't in one direction. She said what you should do is when you're like 69 to 70, tell people you're 85, and people will say, my God, you look good for your age. But a lot of times when they're 60, they try to tell people I'm 45, and some folks might go, oh, that's nice. I went to my high school reunion. You look at a couple of them, you go, don't lie about your age, pal. Just don't lie about your age.
Well, and now our listeners know why we do audio-only recordings, because we have faces made for radio.
Well, speaking for yourself, you know,
I'm speaking for you.
Yeah, no, I make it on the air. Hey, Jeff, let's kind of bring this again to a close here, because I think, is there anything else you wanted to cover that we didn't last time? Because I know you mentioned a couple things. It's like you were working basically the evening shift, you know, from 6 at night to 6 in the morning, you know, and you had some teams out there. You were the team leader for your folks there. You know, is there any additional detail you wanted to add into that we might not have covered the first time?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I expand upon the fact what our role was. I was a team leader for Montgomery County SWAT working the night shift, and my vehicle was a command vehicle. In the vehicle with me was a team leader from Maryland State Police and the team leader from FBI HRT, Chuck Pierce. Our role was to kind of coordinate the response of the other 9 3-man teams on the night shift to the various calls that took place. And any given day, we'd get a dozen calls, whether it be searching a wood line, building, vehicles, this, that, or whoever it may be. But again, our role was to kind of coordinate the response of our 3 agencies to all the calls that would come in.
And how did that work out? I mean, it's because one of the key things I think people don't understand, and some of them probably do, right? But you are a tight-knit team. You have trained with your folks on Montgomery County PD for years, and now you're bringing somebody else into it that you've maybe never met before, maybe you never trained with before. How well did that integration of all these different agencies go? And
you make a great point, because even though we're SWAT teams, 3 different tactical teams, every tactical team does things different. And I had great concerns about how it's going to work out. But very early on, everybody kind of gelled very rapidly into one team. So our movements became second nature to each other, much as it would be within your own team and so forth. So it worked out very well, much more so than I thought it would.
Steve, you might try coming off mute, pal.
Okay, I'm back. That's critically
we
important.
We are not editing that out. I'm sorry, pal. You're falling on your face in front of millions and millions of people.
That's right. I'm going to cough and blow my nose next time on the microphone. But that's critically important, especially what the HRT commander said at the end, because this is a teamwork job. You know, this Lone Ranger crap, that's just television, that's Hollywood stuff. It does require a team, and the fact that he made that statement is just phenomenal. Because now, you know, for the rest of your life, you have the utmost respect for him, simply because he made that statement. That's the way it should be.
And one thing I think that happened over that 3-week period is, for all these different calls we were running, basically it was a rehearsal for the final operation, because what was happening is we were gelling and becoming one team. So while we didn't specifically do vehicle assaults during the 3-week period, the fact that we were working together and gelling was kind of all a rehearsal for that final operation.
Yep, you're building up that trust in each other.
All right, let's get down to an important detail. Who had the best looking uniforms? Come on, be honest. Who had the coolest looking tactical uniforms?
Well, we're all in black fatigue, so I'll just give it
Black is the new black. Yeah, just come on.
back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day, everything was black. So, but hey, the other thing too that's kind of interesting. I remember one time, just for shits and giggles, when I was a state trooper and we were getting all this new equipment and stuff, I weighed myself in my skivvies, then I put everything on and I weighed myself, and I didn't realize, and you don't realize how much extra weight you're carrying around. I mean, just normal outfitting back then, it was 25 to 30 pounds, and no wonder I had a bad hip, in the back for a while, depending on how you're sitting. How much, when you load it up and you've got your rifle, you've got your helmet, you got all your other stuff, your vest with the steel plate, all that good stuff. How much extra weight were you carrying?
It's 35 pounds worth of gear, and much of our SWAT physical fitness test is geared towards that. In other words, when you do your pulse, you got to do it with 35-pound plate to simulate the weight of your gear. When you do a rope climb, you have to do it with a 35-pound weight attached, simulating the weight of your gear.
Yeah, I do that when I do pull-ups. I got like a 40-pound gut that I got to try and get up there.
Yeah, but Steve, you're standing on a chair when you do the pull-ups too. So.
Don't give up my secrets. They can't see my feet.
Oh, yeah. You can't see your feet anymore either. Jeff's still working out, though. Hey, Jeff, what does a normal day look like? I mean, with everything you're dealing with, what does a routine look like for you?
I get up in the morning and, I always make my bed because that kind of gets me in order for the tasks of the day. And then I do exercise. Exercise is very important in terms of trying to stay healthy when you've got a lot of medical things that you're working on. But I find the exercise that keeps me on a positive mood. It might be the endorphins that are released, but it kind of gives you that peace of mind, happiness to move forward and do things.
Yep. It sets the tone for the rest of the day. I love it. If you don't do anything else the rest of the day, you've done that.
Well, just go to YouTube and look up Admiral McCraven addressing the University of Texas people. That's what he talked about. You read some of the leadership books, they say, it's amazing. Make your bed the first thing, and you've accomplished something for the day. Like you say, you set the tone for the day. All right. So, hey, well, look, anything else we may not have covered in the first one you want to make sure we get out this time? Because if I bring you back on a third time, people are going to wonder if we have our act together, not you. So
no, but I greatly appreciate the opportunity to kind of bring to light some things I thought I admitted the first time through.
Well, and look, you have an excuse,
Yeah, we just want to say, thank you again, Jeff, for your service to your community. And please pass along our pride in regards to your bride for her service to the community as well. 39 years, holy cow, that's longer than I was a cop. I was there for almost 38. So God bless her and you as well, brother.
Thank you. You guys have a great day.
Hey, everybody, this is a special episode. Murph and I have just invented something never done before in the history of podcasting, or maybe it has, but we're laying credit for it. This is an embedded episode. This is where we have taken somebody who's got a story around the DC Sniper, and we're going to embed their story into the story of the DC Sniper, as told by Officer Jeff Nyce.
Well, wait a minute. When you said in bed, I thought that meant we would record this while we're in bed.
No. That's bed. This
sorry.
is bed, E-M-B-E-D, as in embedded. With you're still in bed with your slippers because you're moving to Florida, Steve. So.
Yes, I am. I'll be in my Speedo soon.
Oh God.
There's a sight.
No, the case is over. I can't. You can't unsee that. All right.
And our guest over here shaking his head like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, so before he throws up, so we've got a special guest here. His name is Aaron Turner. His name used to be classified because even Aaron didn't know what his name was. He is the Matt Damon. He is the Jason Bourne of the keyboard. And so
he really is.
He's a failed lawyer. Come on, dude. You couldn't make it in law school, so you became a computer geek, didn't you, Aaron?
Well, that's a long story in and of itself, but essentially I saw the error of my ways when I was headed down the lawyerly path, and I figured it would be more ethical to hack computers than to go down the lawyer.
I love it.
And you know what I figured out too? I saw a poster one time, and this gets back into Aaron's going to tell you about his work at Microsoft, but I saw a poster one time that showed Bill Gates and Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan, it said Michael Jordan earns this much for a game, this much for a season, this much for a year, and then you look at Bill Gates, he earned all of that, what Jordan earned in a year, Gates earned basically in a week.
Jeez.
Technology is the most scalable way to make a living, as long as you can stay out of jail doing it.
Well, or as we found in the case of Bill Gates now lately, keep your zipper up too. So there's going to be another. You thought Bezos's divorce was huge, you know?
Yeah,
As
Eric's not
Dominic
saying anything. Look at Eric.
says,
He's
this
not
is going
saying
to be
anything.
huge. But let's not go down. Let's bring this back to the embedded episode. So one of the reasons we did this is Steve is actually going to go out and speak at a conference that Aaron is hosting. And as we found out, as we started doing a little bit digging, Aaron actually has a tie-in to the DC sniper case, not only with one of the victims, but actually one of the pieces of evidence that came out of the car that Jeff, when Jeff on the SWAT team with the Maryland State Police and the 4 FBI HRT members, when they assaulted the car, part of the evidence that came out was a laptop. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But Aaron, before we get started, let's just give everybody just a quick, brief overview of your background. How the hell did you get to the point of where you were behind a keyboard instead of behind a desk charging people $500 an hour to tell them the obvious, which is what lawyers do?
Yeah. So I have always been intensely curious about technology. I was one of those kids who was getting in trouble on the school network. I was
Did
born...
you hack into your school and change your grades? Is that how you got into law school?
Luckily, I was a good enough student. I didn't have to change my grades, but let's say that I had access to look at what my grades were. And so the situation was, I grew up in that generation of when Matthew Broderick and War Games came out, sort of that early 80s, mid 80s time frame. And I was just fascinated with all things computer. I loved to connect them together and just do things, whether it was gaming or graphics or different things. And so by the early 90s, I had gotten involved in helping to write several of the protocols for email. So like what we came to use as email sending and receiving stuff. And so that just fascinated me. And then I got involved in building out ISPs because I...
So you have to define, you can't just throw terms out there. One of the rules of the show is you throw an acronym out, you got to define it.
Internet service providers. Okay, so internet service providers. So imagine a closet with a whole bunch of modems inside of it, and that's where you dial into to get the screechy stuff where you'd go and do BBS.
Remember the old AOL, the screeching, yeah.
And so that's where I got my start, is sort of hands-on building out the internet. Well, I then got involved in a situation where one of my servers got hacked. And a group of individuals actually put some pornography on my system that was illegal in the state that I was living in.
That's your story, and you're sticking to it, right?
I'm sticking to
Steve,
it. Well,
you trained him well. It wasn't me. It was the Christian's comrade.
Luckily, I actually had the digital, I developed a digital forensic evidence gathering technique, one of the first ones outside of the military, where I was able to show that it was these other people who put that stuff there and it wasn't me.
Were they in the United States or outside the United States?
So I was attending a private religious university at the time, and someone at Cal Berkeley thought it would have been funny to put some pornography on some religious university students' computers. And so it was done as sort of a prank, but it almost got me kicked out of school. And so luckily I was able to show it with someone else's, and I stayed in school. It was at BYU in Provo, Utah. So Utah was sort of a hotbed at the time. That's where the headquarters of Novell was. That's where WordPerfect was founded. So there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff going on there. Well, as a result of that hack, I had to essentially teach myself to hack back, right, to protect myself. And this would have been 93, 94 timeframe. And so then I realized that everybody sort of needed this help. And so I just stood up a little consulting practice and began to help people protect themselves. So I would do what we called white hat hacking, or pen testing, penetration testing. And it paid good money. I could basically sit down on a weekend, make a couple $1,000s, and that's what I was using to pay my way through college. And when I went to law school down in Dallas, that community down there between the law firms and financial services organizations, they just needed a lot of help. And so when I dropped out of law school, that's what ended up being my main source of income, was helping people from a security perspective. And that's what exposed me to some of the more interesting stuff from a nation state perspective, of when you see bad people doing bad things to, for example, law firms, where let's say some international criminal organization wanted to get into the law firm. And so they would call me in to help harden their systems. In the late 90s is when Microsoft found me and invited me to join their team. And at the time, there was no dedicated Microsoft security team. It was just sort of a volunteer firefighter approach to security. And so I had my day job that was focused on building internet service providers in places like Bogota and Caracas and other places in Latin America. And in the meantime, I'm helping from a security perspective And so by, the early 2000s, myself and a couple of other people had sort of established ourselves as security leaders in the company, go-to people when really bad stuff happened. And so, when Microsoft itself was hacked in October of 2000, we sort of formed an emergency response team to respond to the Russians taking all the Windows 2000 source code.
See, I knew it. The darn Russians, it's the same way the Chinese are. I mean, I think at one time even Bill Gates said 90% or 92% of the software in China was all pirated.
Yeah. And that was one of the projects I got to work on. We did a deal with the Chinese government to reduce piracy, and as a result, I went to Beijing and actually helped to develop some technologies to protect Microsoft source code from the People's Liberation Army and some of the excellent hackers that the Chinese have. That was sort of my first exposure to the cyber warfare elements that were going on overseas. We actually worked with the FBI to develop capabilities. Well, we actually tricked a couple Russians into coming to the United States, and I was the bait. And they got to the Seattle airport, got off the airplane, and got handcuffed.
I know exactly the case you're talking about. And they logged back in from their desk there back into servers in Russia. And this actually created a controversy because the question was, could you seize data from a foreign country through a search warrant from the United States? That was you. Did you ever know a guy named... Well, that was you that did it. Did you ever know a guy named Tom Nesbitt?
Yep. So Tom was part of that team as well. There was a wide group of people working on that between state, federal, Microsoft people, lots of people working on that case.
Tom was one of my students.
Okay.
Back to the FBI. I'm from the FBI. I'm here to help. Actually, real quick joke. When we were doing the computer forensics training and stuff down in Orlando, Florida, there was me, two guys from Arlington County PD, and a guy named Jim Scripture from the FBI. Really good guy, Boston guy. Sounds like Ed Davis, Steve. And we're all talking about, okay, we're going to go in and raid this room. What are we going to do? I said, okay, I'll be the first person. The two big guys will be second and third. And Jim Scripture, the FBI agent, goes, well, what do you want me to do? I said, well, why don't you just take credit and put out a press release?
I got that covered already. What else?
They're good at that.
Yeah. But what's interesting, though, you are now starting to work inside, federal law enforcement, and I just want to make sure that you lead towards. You and Murph actually met when?
So it was right after 9/11. This would have been late 2001, early 2002.
2002.
When I started to work with U.S. law enforcement. So when 9/11 happened, there was sort of this scramble for talent and ideas to try to say, how can we use technology to counteract some of the bad things that were going on in the world? And so some senior folks inside of Microsoft gave us authority to basically go and help, right? And say, okay, here's your rules of engagement, go and help. And so by late 2002, we actually established some early relationships with folks like Steve inside of the U.S. federal law enforcement. And so we were helping folks at Quantico, at FBI, and we make fun of them, but they were trying to help. They were trying to get stuff going in that time frame. And then eventually, what was nice about Steve's organization is that, how should we put this? Rules were flexible. Rules are flexible for DEA, right? They move at
They're
a
more
much
like
faster
suggestions
pace.
and not really rules.
That's exactly right. Don't break the law, but the rules, what the heck?
Yeah, and so that flexibility allowed us to move almost a year and a half earlier than any other major federal law enforcement agency when it came to developing investigation techniques, developing capabilities to use technology against criminals. So not just being, forensically sound in the investigation, but using technologies to maybe, set up false fronts that could lure in criminals to do bad things under proper legal authority, right? So nothing, that wasn't under the guise of the Constitution. But, so it was fun because myself and there was another individual named Rob Hensing who was helping me at Microsoft. We were sort of two creative young guys who, there's something broken inside of us. Whenever you're a white hat hacker, you have to have something broken inside of you. You've got to have sort of that little bit of evilness, right? That stays controlled.
One paycheck away from the dark side is what we used to say.
And as I'm not talking to you from a federal penitentiary or anything, so obviously I've made.
Well, how do we know? It's a gray background. It's a dark gray. It looks like there's some bars in the windows back there.
The statute of limitations has run out also, so you're safe.
That's right. So what was really cool is that Rob and I...
Unless, Steve, just a minute. Unless it's a continuing conspiracy.
There you go.
You
I don't know Aaron Grant. I don't know Aaron Turner. Who the hell are you?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, bud.
No. So by the time Rob and I get connected with Steve and his team at Special Operations Division, we're able to sort of use our technological creativity to come up with some really interesting ways to look at how people are doing things, tracing packages through secondary technology sources, looking for the way that precursor chemicals are bought and sold in large marketplaces on the internet. And so it was just really cool to apply our technological creativity to something that was actually doing good, right? Where we were able to move forward.
Aaron, let's be honest. One of the biggest things you did for SOD is you brought in an early version of Halo, and you guys played it, didn't you?
Absolutely.
So it was the brand new release of the Xbox One, and Rob and I were pretty good at Halo, so we thought it would be funny to bring these games in. So we brought in 4 Xboxes, and this was before Xbox Live. So you had to connect them on a network together, right? So you had 4 Xboxes, and you could play 16 players in a game together. And we thought it was a hoot that we could, use sniper shots to blow these DEA guys away inside of the game because, we're these cool geeky guys. Well, later, one of the DEA guys brought in his son, and then he blew us away too. So
the kid was 15 years old.
Well, Stephen, to this day, you made a startling admission. I want everybody to know. You turn off the lights in your basement, you put on your blackface and your camo, and you play Halo, don't you?
Absolutely. And it's funny, my youngest daughter, I taught her how to play. So when she was in college, they were co-ed dorms when she went through college here several years ago, and the guys would get their Halo game out to play it, and she'd go in, they're like, "Oh, hey, you ever play this game?" She's like, "Well, I've seen it. I saw my dad play it."
She's a ringer.
Oh, she kicked her butts.
And by the way, for the uninitiated, technically the term Halo stands for high altitude, low opening when you're talking about parachute jumps for you special forces like Force Recon and SEALs and Delta guys. But so that was your you were responsible for the hugest drop in efficiency inside a DEA for like 6 weeks, weren't you, when you introduced Halo?
I tell you what, and I'll admit to this because we used to keep the Xbox and the games back in the training division at SOD, and I had taken over training from another agent, Steve Whipple. And a holiday weekend came up. You guys went home for the weekend, and I snuck in the office and brought that home. And my wife and kids were out of town. A whole weekend, I'm sitting there going, "I'm gonna kick this guy's ass one of these days. One of these days, I'm gonna get him." And I'm pretty sure I still couldn't.
Oh my God!
What was great about those games is that it gave us an opportunity to interact with those agents that we worked with in ways that we never would have seen them in any other guys, right? And it really brought down the barriers that existed.
Right.
And by the time, I don't know, we were probably 2 or 3 months into that program. And by that point, we had such a good relationship, whether it was through the Halo games, sitting around having dinner with these crazy guys and listening to their stories about crawling. I can't remember who it was crawling through the Colombian jungle and doing crazy stuff. And, anyway.
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it just getting to know people at that level helps you to build a team where oftentimes that's difficult between a cybersecurity or a cyber warfare type person and someone who's actually running an operation. In the situations where I've seen where cyber operations have failed is because the teams don't communicate well together. And it was through those games like Halo that really helped us meld.
It was.
Now, did they take you out to the range and show you what real guns look like?
I don't think we did any shooting with you guys.
No,
we did.
not
We
us.
did with FBI and we did with SOCOM, but we never did with the EA.
And you know what? It helped to build and develop that trust factor between each other, because here you got Aaron and Rob in there, and we're bringing in law enforcement
who are civilians.
Yeah, and we're bringing in law enforcement from all around the world, and just like you said, the law enforcement guys are going to look at you two guys like, who are these two young whippersnappers in here telling us what to do? But because Whipple was in there, I was in there, and a couple of retired DEA guys, and we're vouching for you. That gave you guys all the credibility, and that all came from the trust and respect and the friendship that we developed over that time.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Cool. Well, now so you meet Murph, one of the great tragedies that I'm sure it's tainted your career since then.
I'm scarred forever.
You're scarred, yes. The background's tough to make it through the backgrounds now for a
I like
clearance.
to have a meaningful purpose in everyone's life.
So one of the reasons for this embed episode was let's a lot of neat stuff going on, but we now want to start focusing now on the DC Sniper because basically a year after 9/11 is when the car was bought. That's when the vehicle was bought, was actually on September 11th, 2002. And sometime I'll show you, I'll send you now an unclassified version, but we actually did some of the work I did inside some places was we looked at the intersection between them and law enforcement, same thing with the hijackers. And it's very interesting once you start seeing how many times they actually had contact with law enforcement while the shootings were going on, yet we were all focused on the white panel van. That's what everybody in the Northern Virginia region was looking at, the D.C., National Capital Region. But let's talk about, not just those events, but how did you eventually end up getting there embedded with the FBI to where the opportunity came that you got involved with them? So take us on that path towards that, Aaron.
Yep. So Microsoft has essentially allowed for myself and a couple of other people to be the primary points of engagement. Whenever there was a technical question from U.S. federal law enforcement, that they essentially would use us as the primary points of technical contact. And so I was actually at Steve's office when I got the first phone call from the FBI CART lab. So from the point at which
acronym
computer and response team, I think.
Computer analysis response team. I trained those guys for a year. Let me tell you, I can't believe you messed that up.
And they haven't recuperated from your training yet. They're still...
No, they haven't. Hey, but by the way, though, too, Aaron, add some context, too, because at this point in time, DOJ and Microsoft were not exactly best of friends, were they?
Yep. And so that was part of the strategic outcome, or the hoped outcome of essentially seconding myself and Rob over to the federal law enforcement, is that they made us sort of a goodwill offering to say, hey, in spite of the fact that you're trying to sue us and break us up and run this antitrust case, here are these smart folks, and we're going to loan them to you whenever you need them from a technical perspective. Do it, and actually created some goodwill between DOJ and Microsoft. And I think, in addition to the other things that were going on, it helped de-escalate that conflict quite a bit. And so we're essentially these goodwill ambassadors that are trying to say, hey, let us help you solve these hard problems. And we get the first call from the CART lab up in, which at the time was in Maryland, and their forensics tools could not analyze this computer. So if you think about it from a chain of custody situation, the laptop was in that car, the folks you already spoke with were the ones who seized it, they tag it, bag it, send it along the evidence chain. It eventually ends up in what was, at the time, the most advanced computer forensics lab in the United States of America. It's the combined facility between the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Defense Computer Forensics Lab, and the NSA. So this is the main facility just north of NSA at Elk Ridge.
NSA being no such agency.
Yeah, and I used to teach up at Linthicum at the National Cryptologic School, so very familiar with that. But before we get to that, you actually had a tie-in, though. By the time the laptop gets there, when they take them into custody, but one of the victims worked for the FBI that you happen to know.
Yeah, so about would have been 8, maybe 9 months before the shootings start, FBI had really stood up a program, and Linda Franklin was one of the lead analysts who was building that cyber intelligence, not just forensic response capability, but actually going out and saying, how can we gather information to be meaningful from a national security perspective so the FBI could get up to speed? And so Linda was doing some really great work and had put together an interesting team. A couple of reservists who were former military intelligence officers were actually reactivated as the result of 9/11, and they were assigned to work with Linda at Quantico. And so we had some interactions with Linda as the result of that, in helping her to stand up that team, gain capabilities, get perspectives about, what does it mean when a criminal organization is trying to use tools like MSN Messenger or Hotmail or some of the tools that Microsoft had access to. And so we had some interactions with her and her team dating back months. And so when the shooting happened at Home Depot, which is where she was killed,
October 14th of 2002, Falls Church.
Exactly. And so that really struck home to myself and others who had worked with her to go, it makes you ask the question, am I involved in this? Like, are they going to come after us because we've been doing something? Because it's just pure paranoia. It was nonsensical, right? Your human brain makes crazy connections, but it did make us ask the question, do we have some crazy connection here? So it added to the level of paranoia that was going on in the region at the time.
Well, and trust me, we were all in the region at the same time, dodging, zigzagging, going to your cars, standing behind gas pumps. But I want to kind of set the stage for this, though, too, because we talk about the laptop, but we have to go back and talk about September 5th. And I was just pulling up because I wanted to make sure I was factually correct, but it's Paul LaRufa. He was a 55-year-old pizzeria owner. He was shot. He actually survived. He was shot 6 times at close range, locking up his Italian restaurant in Clinton, Maryland. And that's when Malvo and Muhammad stole the laptop that ended up becoming center for this. So the car's breached. Now we kind of fast forward to October 24th. This is 10 days after Linda's killed. The final victim was killed on October 22nd. October 24th, they get this. So when do you get this call from the FBI to say, hey, we need some help?
Yep, it would have been the first week of November. So basically, they had exhausted their capabilities to go after the system. The tools that they were using at the time did not have the technical capabilities to analyze a portion of the hard drive on this system. So for the non-techie folks out there, think about that. Every system has some form of storage mechanism where the operating system and your files get stored. And prior to the release of Windows XP, that file system was generally fully available. It didn't have any protections on it from the factory.
No encryption, not protected in any way.
It was widely available. So you could essentially take that laptop, plug it into a forensic analysis system, and get whatever you wanted. Well, with the release of Windows XP, what happened was there was a new technology that Microsoft had embedded called hibernation, which when you close the laptop lid, it shuts the system down, and it writes everything that's in operating memory, so all of the programs, the Word documents you're working on, whatever, it encapsulates that into a file and then writes it to the drive. Now, the engineers who wrote this at Microsoft wanted to make sure that they had some level of integrity, and so they used a very basic form of encryption to encrypt that hibernation file. So think of it as setting a seal on it to say, when the laptop lid was closed, this is what it was, and so when it reanimates, it knows it can be trusted, so it doesn't create...
Kind of like the old days. The king would put his ring, you'd seal it with wax, put the ring on there, have the official seal, and say, hey, this is the seal of the king. Hey, who knew we could make a tie back to the 15th century with this? But we did.
And
Nobody.
So that basically told the system that, you can open this file without corrupting it, and you're going to be able to reanimate this system without causing hardware or software problems. And so the laptop that the sniper team stole was this brand new version of Windows XP that had this hibernation system on it. And so what had happened was the last time that they closed the lid, it entered a hibernation state. So by the time the laptop made it to the FBI CART lab, you basically had a situation where that hard drive was encrypted with this encryption key, this hibernation encryption key. And so when the forensics tools tried to reanimate it, it couldn't make sense of anything. So the tools...
Could they get any data off of it at all, or was everything locked up?
They basically saw that you could get basic operating system information, but you couldn't get all of the interesting stuff that the user had created. So think
like
of
the
user
file
files
information, the doc, yeah.
Exactly. And so you end up with this situation where they say, okay, great, I've got the basics, but I don't have the juicy stuff. So that's the reason why they called us and they said, hey, our forensics tools cannot reanimate this. Can you help us? So because of the tension that was existing between DOJ and Microsoft at the time, we first had to go to the Microsoft legal team and basically get permission.
And Aaron, before you get into that, let's kind of set the stage so that people understand why you even went to the legal team, right? Because in this day and age, the encryption that happens, nobody has access to it anymore with the iPhone 12 and stuff like that, right? But in those days, Microsoft, we don't want to call it a backdoor because it wasn't a backdoor, but the way it was designed back then, you could actually get, in a sense, a master key, right?
Yep.
To unlock encryption.
So remember that this encryption was implemented not for confidentiality, but for integrity. So as the result, it used a master keying system. So meaning that there was a master key that was used to create these hibernation file images. And so as the result, if you got the master key, you could then decrypt all of the subsequent hibernation files from it. And that's just because of the design, right? It was never intended as a confidentiality mechanism. It was intended as an integrity mechanism. So we go to the Microsoft legal team and basically say, look, DOJ is asking for the decryption key for the hibernation file. Now, this would be the first time that Microsoft has ever turned over an encryption key to anybody.
And I can imagine lawyers falling out of their chair laughing right about this point. DOJ wants what from us?
Yeah, especially in light of the fact that they're trying to destroy us as a company, right? So this is the same DOJ that's trying to sue us out of existence and destroy our company, and now they're asking us for help. And so we sort of had to bridge that gap because the small team of lawyers that has sort of set us loose to become liaisons with law enforcement weren't involved in these conversations. These were like their boss's boss's boss who were making this decision. And so finally, after I basically made my case to say, look, it would set a very good precedent for us to say we will help U.S. and their allies to do investigations at this level. We want to be perceived as an organization that is helping protect Western values and helping protect law and order. And so after an infinite number of conference calls, maybe 2 days of just successive, people talking back and forth and emails and that sort of thing, they finally said, okay, you can do it. Well, within Microsoft at the time, there was a master database that would tell you the name of the developer who owned a particular portion of the source code. And so what we did is we went to the source tree and we found the individual who was responsible for the code that invoked the hibernation encryption key. And so we got in touch with him. We were able to get all of the information we needed, get that key. We had it.
And when you say key, let the listeners know, what does a key, a key isn't a physical key, right? But what does the key look like? What form does it actually take when you take it and put it in your sweaty little palms to take to the FBI cart lab?
Well, so think about it. The key is originally stored inside of the operating system when it's compiled. And
so it's a bunch of ones and zeros. It's digits, right?
Exactly. It's a whole bunch of ones and zeros. And actually, the human readable format would be more similar to what we call hex code, which is like hexadecimal. So think of it as a series of 0, 1s and a few letters and numbers too.
Letters,
right?
numbers, yeah.
And so you have this big long hexadecimal string of numbers. In this case, it probably, if you were reading it and you wrote it on a chalkboard, it would probably fill an entire college chalkboard with this hexadecimal string. So think it was an extremely long series of letters and numbers. We actually had that burned onto a CDR, so good old, writable CDs. This was before USB keys really caught on. And so we wrote it to a CDR, and we did that also because we wanted to write it and seal it. So the nice thing about CD writable technology at the time is you could write to it and then lock it, and then you knew that file maintained integrity.
You couldn't record to that disk again.
Exactly.
Right. Couldn't change anything.
And so we took that CDR and we actually, we were supposed to be doing some stuff for Murphy's team. We had to make up a story because at this time we weren't allowed to tell DEA.
Steve, it sounds like he's about to tell us he lied to you about something.
Maybe we just talked about a long lunch or something, right? And so, because at the time we weren't allowed to cross streams between the different work we were doing with the different agencies. And so we actually had to leave DEA SOD and drive up to the lab that was up at Elk Ridge in Maryland. And then we walked in and hand-delivered the CDR over to the team there. And when we did that, it was really interesting because the system was there on the desk. But then there were also the systems that Daniel Pearl had purchased in Pakistan, the 3 laptops that had Flight Simulator loaded on them.
And Daniel Pearl was the New York Times reporter that was actually killed by Sheikh Khalid Mohammed, KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, right?
He was beheaded.
And that was he was beheaded, yeah.
And so, seeing those laptops and knowing what they were, it kind of sends a shiver through you, right? You're like, oh man, these were, actual machines that were used in the implementation of the 9/11 attacks. And so, because we were the Microsoft experts, first we deliver the key for decrypting the DC Sniper's laptop, but at the same time, they're asking us some questions about how would we go about doing forensics on Flight Simulator to get artifacts out of those other systems as well.
Was that a Microsoft product, the simulators? Was that the Microsoft simulator?
Yeah, it was the Microsoft Flight Simulator that they were using. So once we delivered the key over to them, they loaded it into their forensic analysis tools. They unlocked the system, and now they saw that Malvo and his companion were using Microsoft MapPoint to track themselves as they were shooting people. So they actually had created a digital map of their own crime. And so what was great and very satisfying about delivering that key and helping in that is that we actually recovered evidence where it was almost irrefutable. We had digital forensic evidence where they were tracking themselves with a pin in Microsoft MapPoint. So think of it as a very early predecessor of what Google Maps is now. Here they had a Microsoft MapPoint system tracking themselves as they were going and doing these shootings.
And from the official FBI files, a laptop stolen from one of the victims containing maps of the shooting sites and getaway routes from some of the crime scenes. I mean, they got him with the Bushmaster rifle, but it's like anything else. Is you really want to lock this thing down. You just want to hammer them with everything. And the fact that they stole it and started mapping it, my first thought is, well, first of all, these guys are nothing but terrorists to begin with. They're nothing but cold-blooded terrorist killers. But then second of all is that you actually are doing this in a way that I don't want to say is smart, but from a tactical standpoint, the tactics they used caused fear. Everybody was looking for the wrong thing, so they were intelligent in the use of the tactics. But to put all of that on a laptop, I think to me when I look at it just from a behavioral standpoint, is they sat back, I think, and they liked it. They relived it. They could look at it and say, "Here's what we did here. Here's what we did here. Here's what we did here."
And from the digital evidence that was recovered, it was obvious that they were sort of training themselves to improve their operational tactics. So as we had conversations with investigators in the months following, we theorized that they were using that map point technology to say, okay, which side of the street do you park on? How many getaway routes do you have? And so they were using the mapping technology to actually improve their tactics to become more efficient at their terrorist campaign.
So here's a little factoid a lot of people don't know that came out of the work that I did, but did you realize that Malvo and Muhammad's vehicle, that Chevy Caprice, the blue Chevy Caprice, its tag. So there's a system the FBI has that is run by their CJIS division, their Criminal Justice Information Services division. It's called NCIC, the National Crime Information Center. So when you have a stolen vehicle, a wanted person, it's the central file that all police officers check. Do you realize that their tag was run 13 times within 33 days by law enforcement? Law enforcement had contacted that vehicle and contacted them directly, including on a off-ramp up near Baltimore. Law enforcement had actually had contact with Malvo and Muhammad. And by the way, that's the only vehicle in the United States whose tag was run in the National Capital Region, as well as down by Montgomery, Alabama, where the other shootings happened. And that's some of the consulting we did, is how do you get into this offline data and visualize it and show them this is what went on. And this is one of the reasons they got away with it for so long, because we were sitting here looking for a white panel van, and instead they were in a blue Chevy Caprice, which, by the way, a dark-colored or burgundy-colored Chevy Caprice was seen leaving the scene of a shooting 4 times in the offense reports. 4 times the vehicle was seen and spotted. But yet, what did everybody? Steve, this goes back to stuff we've talked about. You just can't let the news lead you around by the nose. Every time we shut down traffic, we're looking for a white panel van.
Yeah, everybody was looking for that white panel van.
And I think the key takeaway that, if we were giving this talk in a format in front of the next generation of law enforcement folks, the next generation of intelligence officers, I think the first thing that we've got to learn from these kinds of situations, and hopefully we have learned to some extent, is you've got to break up your own investigative patterns. And so as we were building out cyber investigative capabilities, one of the things that myself and the teams that I worked on did is we always tried to embed some amount of chaos where it would disrupt the manner with which we were trying to run the program. Oftentimes that was very... it wasn't appreciated by management. We'll just say that, because they want you on a straight line. You're working towards this outcome. But later in life, I got invited to work on a program where we emulated a cyber attack against the U.S. power grid, where we actually blew up a generator out on the Idaho desert as part of a cyber attack demonstration. And when we did that, the main thing that we focused on was, how do we make sure we're doing this in a way that had that chaotic element? Because we wanted to avoid those kinds of single-railed approaches that basically extended the amount of chaos that Malvo and Muhammad created.
Well, it reminds me of the great movie by Clint Eastwood, Heartbreak Ridge. Well, maybe I'll make an appointment with you to pop a hole in your ass. Like commies don't make appointments. I mean, that's why he fired that AK-47 over, everybody said. And that's the thing, in a real investigation, it is chaos. It is, but it's how do you manage the chaos, and how do you just, it's like a map. put a dot on the map. I can't tell you how we're going to get there, but we all know where we want to get, but how we get there is going to be different. But I agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest problems, and this is one of the talks I give, is the problem isn't the problem. The problem is how we think about the problem.
What do you expect the unexpected? That teaches you to do that. Don't get complacent.
Yeah, that's why, Murph, I'm low crawling into your basement later this morning and surprising you. Expect the unexpected.
Be careful. Be careful.
They're a little bit later this morning. There'll be a 4-year-old here to kick your butt.
Maybe we'll play Halo and we'll see if she can beat me on that. But so eventually, so let's finish up on this piece of this. So eventually, how much time did you end up? Was your contribution just initially at that point to give them the key? And did you have to take the key back? In other words, did you let them keep it or did you take it with you?
So we allowed them to maintain it, right? And so basically we said, look, this is for you. And the terms of the handover were that it had to stay within that essentially National Center of Excellence laboratory. Now, eventually we got calls from so many other folks because now you have the perfect storm that happened in this situation was Windows XP had just released. And so as a result, forensics tools that were not ready for it. Well, Windows XP took the world by storm. You now have tens of millions of these systems within a couple of months out there. People are using them. And so we eventually authorized the manufacturers and developers of forensic software to embed that as part of their forensics tools. And so that became a licensing situation where it was allowed to expand. But that took several months to come to fruition.
And again, that was because it was for integrity and not for the protection of privacy of data, which is like we fast forward now, it's like, if it's encrypted, it's encrypted. I mean, whether it's Microsoft or Apple or whoever else, it's like, guys, we don't have the keys to decrypt this. And that's been part of this, they call it the Going Dark initiative when we started getting voice over IP, which is, being able to talk over the internet or send data. When you get to the point where you have encryption that has no mechanisms to access it, that's what they call it, going dark, right? So the difference between 2000 and now is privacy was an issue, but it wasn't the issue that it is today when we start talking about whether it's Facebook, or what just happened with the whistleblower, and things like that. So had that investigation happened today, had we had the DC sniper today, it probably would have been very problematic to be able to get access to that data if it's encrypted, right?
Well, you would have to use some tricks to bypass it. There would not be a single place to call to get the master key. And so, that's why, you see organizations who are doing high-level investigation, doing things like getting the credentials to someone's Apple ID, because once you get the credentials to their Apple ID, then you can print the keys to recreate the decryption pattern, right? And so that's why your username and password have become so important within the Apple ecosystem. Is once someone gets that Apple ID, then they can get access to the private key to decrypt your stuff. And so the thing to recognize back 20 years ago was that in that case, that decryption key, as we mentioned, was only for integrity. There was another encryption system built into Windows at the time that was developed for confidentiality. If Malvo and Mohammed would have used that other system, which was basically a personal encrypted file system that would have encrypted those files, it would have taken a much darker turn, right? It would have taken us much, much longer. It would have required some brute forcing, would have required some very much more sophisticated technology, which would have destroyed the standard FBI chain of custody for digital files at the time.
Right, because it would have probably altered the what's called the the digital signature, the hard drive. When you take, so for folks that are listening, here's the geeky part. I still have a little bit of geek left in me, but when you would take these a little, yes. When you would take these hard drives, one of the ways you would be able to prove is that nothing has changed on that hard drive from the minute you make an exact duplicate, bit for bit, byte for byte, is you'd run these algorithms that would create this very large mathematical value called a hash value, and then what you would do is you'd seize it. You'd run this digital signature, you'd analyze it, then you run the digital signature again to show nothing has changed. And if one bit has changed, if one byte has changed, defense attorneys, as they got smarter, that's like tampering with the evidence. That's saying, I sent you, a car to analyze, and I got back a moped. What the hell happened here, pal?
And that's what makes digital investigation so difficult now, is because most of the consumer grade technologies require reanimation in a way where there can be tampering. Right? It is conceivable that a technically adept person could tamper with the evidence. And so, it's constantly the race. We were lucky back then 20 years ago. We were able to help. We were able to do that. But today it's created a lot of problems for investigative capabilities.
Well, 20 years ago, Al Gore had barely invented the internet. So, I mean, we were just still getting up to speed, on the internet and stuff. So, now, hey, man, Aaron, so what was the final resolution? I know we've talked to you about it, but the folks don't know. So, was your participation in court required? Did they call you? Did they ask? What ended up being your participation from a legal standpoint after that?
So we have, over the course of several weeks, we continue to support the investigative team. They would ask us questions about, okay, if you were trying to track something through Microsoft MapPoint, what would you look for? What kind of file types, that sort of thing. So we sort of served as consultants to that FBI CART Lab team. Well, by the time that everything's getting wrapped up, the way that prosecutors think is they always want to have the most viable or most authentic, most credible witness that's going to present this. And so the U.S. attorneys who are involved in this actually get in touch with us and say, hey, will you guys come in and testify about how this evidence was gathered and, this process so that we can really tell the best story. And, Rob and I are dumb young kids, we're like, well, we'd have no problem coming and showing up in court, but we got to go get attorney's permission. And I think the attorneys made the right decision, basically saying, we do not want to be in the business of providing expert witnesses. We want to be in the business of providing technology, and we will train people to become expert witnesses, but we don't want a Microsoft employee to be an expert witness themselves. And so we never went and testified in court ourselves. We essentially continued in that consultative role until the end of the case.
Well, at least one of them can't appeal now because he got executed. He's room temperature, so that's good for him. And unfortunately for the youngster, Malvo, they found out that he's going through additional legal proceedings right now because they said you can't give a life sentence to a 17-year-old juvenile. So we're waiting to hear about that. But, what I thought was interesting, and when Murph first brought this up and talked about it, what was interesting is we had this episode coming up and we thought, well, let's do a special kind of an embedded, that's EMBED, not INBED, Steve, embed episode, and give you a little bit of context because the laptop was a key piece of evidence along with the Bushmaster rifle. So you take the rifle that ties them to the shootings, and then you take the mapping and the laptop that shows not only did they steal it from the guy, so you've got a connection to the victim, but now they are cataloging, not only, like you say, I think to relive it, but also to get better at their tactics to say, should we be on this side of the street or that side? What are our ingress and egress points? Because remember, when these shootings happened, law enforcement was shutting down everything. They were shutting down interstates. They were shutting down 66. Look, 66 is a shit show on any given day. But when you shut it down and tie it up, there were nothing but lines of cars and taillights.
Yeah.
Up and down 28, up and down 66, this whole region.
Yeah. And the thing that I find interesting is that it's always odd. We're only able to talk about this stuff openly decades after it happens, right? Because everyone's under either clearance requirements or confidentiality requirements, that sort of thing. For me to have this conversation, I still had to go through sort of a clearing process with Microsoft and
Yeah, I know. I called up the folks and I said, hey, look, I know you guys. I actually used to work for the Law and Corporate Affairs Department at Microsoft as an outside consultant. I picked him. I said, hey, Aaron's an okay guy. Just approve this. And you saw that. That came through, right?
Yep. I don't know. Did it?
Well, we're going to find out when I get a letter from a lawyer. Me and Murph get one that say, hey, you got to pull this podcast off the
Hopefully
air.
it will by the time this airs. Okay, so.
My guys in Microsoft PR, they said it was okay. So we'll see.
And we're not really divulging any secrets here. This is
this is all public information. But what's always interesting when we do Game of Crimes, it's getting the story behind the story, right? So when you've got that first person point of view, like what Jeff Nyce gave us, in the episode, he was there. I mean, he was there when they pointed the guns at Malvo and Muhammad, got them, took them into custody, just the whole takedown. But then you realize, too, there's this whole story that goes on behind it that a lot of people, and I tell you, a lot of people don't even know a laptop was taken, much less they know about the rifle, because obviously that's how the shootings happened, but some of the evidence. So, Aaron, I got to tell you, man, that is insightful. That's one of the things we're trying to accomplish, aren't we, Murph? We're trying to provide insight to the people.
And I'm sticking my neck out here when I say this, Aaron, but I doubt that any other podcast has invited you on to tell this story, right?
No, it's exclusive. Game of Crimes exclusive right here.
There you go.
Exclusive. We need to have a exclusive.
You heard it here first, and this is the only place.
Tonight at 6, could listening to Game of Crimes podcast cause you constipation? Tune in and find out. Well, Murph suffers from constant constipation. I mean, that's a given.
Or diarrhea.
No, hey, Aaron. Yeah. So what are you working on now? Let's close out by finding out what is it you're working on now, and tell us what in the hell possessed you guys to invite Murph and JP out to speak to a bunch of coding and geekers and gamers. I mean, what can two old dudes like Murph and JP talk to you guys about?
Well, so the project I'm working on right now is called Sirix Security. It is designed to help protect organizations from ransomware attacks and other types of digital crime that goes on. So most organizations have moved by this point to some element of the Microsoft cloud, where they're using email or SharePoint or OneDrive
Which is called Azure.
Azure, yeah, exactly, or the Microsoft 365 or Office 365 cloud. And so what we're seeing in those attacks is essentially sort of the same roadmap that Murphy and his team saw back in the early mid-90s when you have extraterritorial organizations, people who are operating outside of the law, right, oftentimes under protection of a corrupt government, running...
Oh, Russia, just to throw out something there, like the dark side ransomware gang operating with the implicit approval of Comrade Putin. Well, but anyway, I digress.
You need to realize that dark side is essentially just a franchisee of the Putin cybercrime family, right?
The GRU, the SVR, whoever they need to be, they use them as proxies to attack, interests.
It's rumored that they pay a 10 to 20% commission, right? So basically, anything that they net, as long as they pay, the Putin family, it's okay, right?
Sounds like something out of The Sopranos. Hey, everybody's got to get their get.
That's right.
There's a tax on you. Didn't Pablo put a tax on people too, Steve?
Oh yeah, when he was in prison, you paid 50% of your loads to Pablo.
That's where Putin got it from.
Nothing's free.
With this intersection now of transnational, essentially cyber terrorists, I reached out to Steve and said, wouldn't it be interesting if we start analyzing ransomware games as if they were narco-terrorists? So if we thought about them as, well-funded, well-coordinated, protected by corrupt former governments, what can we do to help protect ourselves? And so we're going to give a talk where we try to think about ways that we can help motivate the cybersecurity community to think more like the DEA SOD guys, right? The guys who
help
go
you to
out
get into the psyche of the criminal.
Yep.
Well, and that's been one of my things, too. I do a talk called The Psychology of Cybersecurity. And one of the reasons, again, the problem isn't the problem. It's the way we think about the problem and the way our adversaries outthink us is we say we're going to put something here and look at it for 3 days. And if it's okay, then we'll put it into our big environment. So what did the Russians do? Like in the SolarWinds attack, they just waited 10 days. They waited 12 days. They popped up their little digital periscope, said, oh, I'm in the environment I want to be. All they did was outthink us. They outthought proverbial, thinking, what we saw was conventional wisdom. And I think that's a great thing to do is that, by the way, the problems, as Einstein said, the problems of today cannot be solved at the same level of thinking at which they were created. So we've got to think differently, not to paraphrase Steve Jobs too much, because I know you're a Microsoft guy. You have Microsoft code. I even see you wearing the old Windows. By the way, I told you, I wonder what I could get for that on eBay. I have the original Windows 95 box. The gold edition.
The shrink wrap got taken off it, though. I mean,
I know the kids, darn kids.
If you give me $20, I'll take that off your hands. That's how much it's worth to me.
No, man. I think I can get more for that. I'm just going to find somebody who can fake shrink wrap from the 1995. So,
hey, anybody can do anything.
And just to add on to what Aaron's saying there, when this airs, which will be on Thursday, the 14th, October 14th, last night, Aaron and I were in Salt Lake City and spoke at the Silicon Slopes Summit.
Yep.
And this is our first opportunity to get together and put this out there and see how it goes.
Well, we will launch you into stardom. We do this on this podcast on a regular basis. We had James Murray from TV's Impractical Jokers, episode 15. Lou Velosi and his book deal came out of episode 4. Lou's now got... I saw Javier wrote the forward for his book, Storefront, The Life of an Undercover ATF Agent, Storefront Operation. So we are in the business of launching people into the stratosphere
Just what you wanted,
in this podcast.
Yeah, and we are going to make sure that we promote the podcast in our talk at the Silicon Slopes Summit. And here's hoping that we use this as an opportunity to to help educate people about the risks of the criminality of cyber problems. So, we're talking about in this podcast, we talked about how, cyber forensics were used to convict a real world criminal. Well, there's a whole bunch of stories we could tell about how cybercrime has resulted in actual infrastructure problems, the deaths of people, and that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? The saying I always say is that, look, the tactics haven't changed over years, over decades. Only the tools have.
Right.
We now have computers to where before we used to use letters. We now have, forensics back when we used to have, other things. So it's like, the Russians have been doing this since 1917 when they invented the original intelligence organization called the V-Cheka. The tools change, but not the tactics, So I think this was very interesting. So look, Aaron, we are closing out on our embedded episode time, but I got to tell you, I'm glad you came on and talked about this. People thought most of the time when you talk to geeks, they're kind of introverted and you got to pull them out of your shell. I'm glad we didn't have to do that with you. You geeky former lawyer couldn't cut it. BYU, SMU dude.
Yeah, I've never had that problem, thankfully. I've been the geeky extrovert, and sometimes that's been to my detriment.
See, that's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
Yes,
It is. But
it's like military intelligence, jumbo shrimp, like John Carlin said.
That's right. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you guys. Good to relive this. And it's also, I'm really grateful that we can document it, because we're reaching a point in time where we need to document some of these things that happened decades ago, because they haven't been documented well. So I appreciate the opportunity to tell the story.
All right, guys, this has been a special episode brought to you by Murph and Morgan, inside of episodes 18 with Jeff Nyce, the DC sniper case. So, hey, Aaron, I got to tell you, great stuff. We're going to have to figure out some way to dive into another case, and I'd be interested to see, too, Murph, what people think about the cyber version of this.
Absolutely.
Because this is a whole new area of crime, right? Sherry talked about it in her episode doing the dark web investigation, for the fentanyl. So there is cyber involved in everything these days, including podcasts. So whatever you do, Aaron, do not hack our podcast and change it to where Murph sounds like the smart one. I'm still the smart one.
Let me tell you, if anybody can do it, I know this guy can do it.
All right, man. Okay, guys, this is great. You guys stay tuned. We got the outro coming up.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
Steve, we made podcast history.
We did.
An embedded episode. And in fact, by the time the folks are listening to this, you will have been speaking out at the Silicon, what it's called, slippery slope, or what's it called? The Silicon slippery slip, or the slippery slope.
The Silicon Slope Summit in Salt Lake City, Utah.
This sounds like a limerick, like, the six sheeps, something I can't even say.
I can't say it.
Some limerick out there. So, that's cool, because Aaron Turner, you met him, like I said, as you guys listened to in the embedded episode years ago. Great stuff. And again, I knew about it, but I didn't know the story behind how they had to get to it and exactly what was on the laptop. So to hear this kind of information, along with, just Jeff's story, what he has survived and what he has done. And his book, you guys got to remember, go get his book. You can find it on Amazon.com. It's called Failure's Not an Option. Jeff Nyce, Nyce, not nice and sweet. We said.
It's hard not to talk about that. That was funny.
Jeffs are nice and sweet. Yes. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Go get his book. Failure is Not an Option. Jeff Nyce, Nyce. Get it off of Amazon. Terrific read. And again, it's a story of survival. This guy, not only were they working their butts off, but then what he faced and his motivation for doing what he did. Just an amazing story.
Absolutely. And Jeff, you just heard from a true American hero who is continuing, regardless of his health status, to do everything he can to protect the public. And then Aaron Turner is probably one of the smartest people I have ever met in my life. I'm very happy to call him a friend. And all these years later, what we did at Special Operations Division back in 2002 was phenomenal. It was a first of its kind, and to be working with him once again, it's just a real honor for me. So thank you to Aaron as well as Jeff for coming on the show, giving us a fantastic interview.
Yeah, and like I said, he was one of the first geeks, nerds I've run into that's actually an extrovert, not an introvert. So that's kind of like a contradiction of terms. He actually wanted to talk.
Yeah, he's got a great personality, and he's funny too. He's hilarious.
Yeah, and as we talked, we found out we had a lot of things in common, but listen to the Embed episode. So guys, we hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, head on over to Apple Podcast, hit that 5 stars. Again, it's magic. It's David Copperfield, David Blaine. It's your favorite street magic artist. We don't know what it does. We just know it works, and it gets us up there, and it lets more people see our podcast. Head on over to gameofcrimespodcast.com for more info about the show. We'll update it as we go along with merch, with everything. Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, you got to get on Patreon. Our Q&A, like we said, was great. We've got, the 3 things coming up, and I still don't even remember what the third one was with Leo. So that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter,
And for the Q&A, go on our fan page on Facebook and send us questions. That's where we're getting these questions from. We're not making this stuff up. But if you don't send us questions, we will start making shit up. So,
but if you're not on patreon.com/Game of Crimes, you don't get to hear the answers to those questions. So if you send them in, you got to join. So you guys head on over there and join that again. And also hit us up on social media, Game of Crimes on Twitter, Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Use our Game of Crimes Podcast at gmail.com if you want to send us a one-off with PayPal, or just do a pause for the cause and support us, or paypal.me/Game of Crimes, whatever it makes it easier for you to support the show. So, Steve, speaking of supporting the show, and the next one we have coming out, this also came via you. It came from the crime actually should be Nicolas Cage's acting in the movie that was based upon this, The Lord of War, right? But let's talk about, I can't even pronounce his last name. We just call him Zach.
Yeah, I can't pronounce it either, and I've known Zach for a long time. Rob Zach, and he'll tell you his last name when he comes on.
Zacharikachuski, something like that.
Yeah, it's got about 48 letters in his last name. But this, I was really excited when we found out that Rob agreed to do this. He goes after the Merchant of Death, a guy named Victor Boot, and you're going to hear the true story. Now, you may have seen the movie Merchant of Death, and that's similar, but it's not a correct.
Well, actually, Lord of War is what it was called.
I'm sorry. There you go. So just you got to listen into what links they go to capture somebody and how they got to that point. And I'm not going to spoil it for you now, but we definitely want you to listen in. It just shows the international footprint the DEA has and how they can go after the largest criminals in the world that are having a negative impact on the United States. Other countries tried, were unsuccessful. Other agencies in the United States tried, but Zach and the guys were able to bring this to a successful conclusion. It's a great episode, very exciting.
Yeah, and this guy may have been responsible for his selling weapons for up to 6 million deaths in low-intensity conflicts. So there was a reason they went after him. But I think we'll leave him with this. We don't want to say too much, but this all started with a challenge at the White House meeting one time when somebody basically said, I don't think you guys can catch him. And somebody from DE says, hey, hold my beer. We'll be right back.
Right. That's exactly right. And they did.
They did. All right. So, guys, this is it. So, like I said, head on over to the Apple, give us that rating, check us out on Twitter and Facebook and the Instagram, the website, all of that good stuff. But we want to say thank you, guys. And hopefully you enjoyed this special embed episode. We've never done this before. We wanted to give you the story behind the story within another story. So, this is like one of those little Russian dolls hidden, within another one. So we're just peeling back the layers of the story. And if you guys like it, stay tuned coming up, right? And thank you guys once again, for playing the biggest game of all, the Game of Crimes.